wabarakatuh. Welcome to the first episode of Seerah Snippets, where I'll be going through different aspects of the Prophet Muhammad's life and character every week, inshallah. These snippets are not in any particular order, and basically they're just linked to things I've been thinking about or things that are going on in the world at the moment. This week I wanted to start around 6 years after Hijrah. So just to think about where the Prophet Muhammad and his companions were. They've been kicked out of Mecca. They've been given an opportunity to settle in Medina and establish a new stronghold there. In between, there's been battles with the Quraysh, and people have been killed. They've lost people that they thought were family and friends ended up turning against them and have rejected them and shunned them. And in this situation, they've been in Medina, and although they've been happily establishing a new society there, there was a longing in the companions' hearts to actually go back to Mecca, to visit their old places where they lived, to see people who hadn't become Muslim and who had stayed behind, family members and others who they missed. And it seemed like an impossible thing to go back to Mecca given the political situation, that they'd actually the Quraysh had established war against them at certain points and even come forward to attack them in their own home. And yet, during this time, one day the Prophet Muhammad had a dream, and he called the people, and he called them, and he wanted to tell them about this dream. And he told them, "I've had a dream in which I saw us going for pilgrimage. I saw us going for the Umrah, and when we were going for the Umrah, this dream, it can't be just a nonsense dream, because the dreams of the prophets are true and they have some deep meaning to them." So from this, the Prophet Muhammad took that it was a good sign that they could go for the pilgrimage, and he started gathering people ready to go to Mecca, and he gathered around 1,400 people who were going to go for the pilgrimage. And I just wanted to imagine the feeling and the buzz that must have been amongst those people. They've not been able to go back home for so long, and yet here they're being told by one that they trust and love and believe with all of their hearts that they can actually go home, go back to Mecca, and not only just enter it but also to perform the pilgrimage. So there was a lot of excitement, and they decided to go and make it very clear that actually they were going as pilgrims, not as warriors, and they set off, and when they reached a certain point, they changed into the ihram, so that when they reached Mecca, they would be clearly pilgrims, clearly visibly pilgrims from their dress. Now, the Prophet Muhammad didn't know exactly what the mood was like in Mecca and how people were going to receive them, although he believed that from his dream that he could actually enter and it shouldn't be a problem. But he sent a scout ahead to find out what the vibe was like in Mecca and what people were thinking. And when the scout came back, he told the Prophet Muhammad that the Quraysh had prepared a small army to meet them, and they were going to try and stop them from entering Mecca. So what the Prophet Muhammad did is he took his people and he took a slightly different route, and he stopped at a place called Hudaybiyah, and that way he managed to meet the small army delegation that come out to meet them. And at Hudaybiyah he set up and he sent Uthman radiallahu anhu to the Quraysh to find out if they could, to negotiate an entry and to see if they could come in. Now, what the Quraysh did was they detained Uthman radiallahu anhu, and then a rumour was started that Uthman had been killed. So this is what the Muslims and the Prophet Muhammad got to hear, and at this point there was obviously some fear amongst the people. And what the Prophet Muhammad did is he rallied the ranks and told them, he got them together, and they all pledged allegiance to the Prophet Muhammad in this situation, that they were going to stick by him no matter what. Now, the whole point of detaining Uthman was to spread fear and cause some kind of worry in the hearts of the Muslims, and to hopefully provoke them to leave the Prophet Muhammad. And what the Quraysh did is they sent a man called Urwa to the Prophet Muhammad, and they sent him to basically try and strike some, to cause some worry and hopefully get him to go home, not enter into the city. But the Prophet Muhammad reiterated that actually they were coming as pilgrims, they didn't want any trouble, they wanted just to do the pilgrimage and go home. Now, Urwa was really shocked at what he saw in terms of how the Prophet Muhammad and his companions related to each other. And he went back to his people and he told them, "I've visited the kings, I've visited Najashi, I've visited other great kings, and I have never seen a people so adoring and so attentive to their leader as these people were to Muhammad. And he just found it shocking. He said that he's given you a good offer, so make of it what you will. So the Quraysh actually thought about it, and they decided to engage in some kind of negotiation, but they needed to show that they were in control here and that they were the ones in power. So they sent someone else called Suhail, and Suhail went to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and when the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ saw him approaching, he said, okay, they're going to negotiate with us, they're going to give us some good terms. And what Suhail came with was an offer of a treaty between the people of Quraysh and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And they put certain conditions within this treaty. And one of the conditions was that they were not allowed to perform the Umrah that year, but they could come back the following year, and that they could spend a certain number of days in Mecca, and they would be allowed entry. And another condition was that if anyone came from anybody from Mecca became Muslim, or any of the Quraysh became Muslim, they were not allowed, and they fled and they went to Medina. The Prophet Muhammad would have to return them. Now, return them meant returning them back to possible torture and other kinds of horrible things as well. And at the same time, if a person comes from Medina and decides to revert back to away from Islam, then they would be allowed to go back to Mecca, and there would be no problem with that. And there were a number of other conditions. The conditions weren't obvious, didn't sound very favourable, but one condition was that there would be 10 years of peace, and neither side would attack the other during those 10 years. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ agreed to these conditions. This was their final offer, and he agreed. And he called his scribe, he called Ali radiallahu anhu to write for him. And he said to Ali radiallahu anhu, write Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. And Suhail said, I don't know who is Rahman, who is Rahim, I don't know who is this. He is basically mocking. He knows what it means, but he refuses to accept any kind of religious terminology which is away from what he has established. So Suhail's like, well, let's just write it as Bismillah, as we used to in days of old. And he was insistent, so the Prophet Muhammad said, okay, fine, write it as Bismillah, as we used to. And then he wanted it write Muhammad, the Prophet of Allah, when they were writing the treaty. And again, Suhail was mocking, and he's like, if we knew you were the Prophet of Allah, we would have let you in, no issue. And he was adamant that he writes it Muhammad as the son of Abdullah. Now the Sahabas weren't too impressed. They wanted it written properly, and they wanted the respect of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to be maintained within this document. But the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ maintained his calm, and he compromised, and he signed this treaty, and it was really hard. The Muslims were really struggling around him as to why he had accepted this treaty. Why was it that they had come all of this way with all of that hope and excitement, and they were unable to enter the city which they had felt that they were promised that they could enter? So the treaty was signed, and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ wants to now return to Medina. And what he told his people was, okay, everyone, now what we need to do is we need to end our ihram, perform your sacrifice and shave your head. And he told his people, and they basically refused to budge. They just didn't do anything. They just sat there. They didn't move. So he told them a second time, and he told them a third time, and every single time the people were not listening. These are the same people who had pledged allegiance to him, and who were, as Urwa had described them, were so attentive to everything he had said, but they could not take what was happening in that moment. The emotions were too high. So he went to his wife Salama, and he told her of his predicament, and she advised him, look, if this is really what you want to do, don't say anything to them, just go out, you perform your own sacrifice and shave your own head, and people will follow suit. And that's exactly what the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ did. He went out, performed his sacrifice, shaved his head, and the people realised then that actually this was for real, and there was no going back, and there was not going to be a change, and they started to do the same. Now, it was not an easy decision for them to do that, even at that point. And there's some mention that even Umar radiallahu anhu questioned the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ as to why why they were going back when he had been promised, when he promised them that actually they would be going on this journey at this moment. And subhanAllah, like if you think about how disappointed they must have been, and how they have been stopped from pilgrimage, how they've been stopped not just from going home but from a beautiful act of worship, which perhaps today if we saw, we might say, oh, if we're deprived of an act of worship, praying in our mosques or going for Hajj, we might say, what's wrong with us? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't want our worship. Yet the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam dealt with them at that moment was to reassure them. And not just to reassure them, was to change their perspective. Because on the way back, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam through the angel Jibreel Surah Al-Fatih, which basically told the people that we have given you, and told the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we have given you a clear victory here. And this is a clear victory. Like, it looks like a disappointment from every single angle, and yet here they're being told, no, this was a clear victory. And later on, it did become obviously a clear victory. They were allowed to go back in without any trouble. They had to, the peace treaty was established, so they went. There was supposed to be peace for a certain amount of time. And there were troubles associated with that as well. They had people come from Mecca who wanted to become Muslim, who were persecuted, and they weren't allowed to take them in under the conditions of that treaty for a period of time. It did change later on. But if you want to look further into this, read up on Surah Al-Fatih. Just read the surah and just think of it in the context of how it came to soothe their hearts when they were going through that disappointment. And just think about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam actually, when they saw the Muslims in difficulty and disappointment, rather than berating them and belittling them every single time, He was just reassuring them and reminding them and changing their perspective. And the other thing about how sometimes going out and telling people what to do doesn't always work. So when the Prophet Muhammad was going out, he told the people what he wanted. It didn't get the people to do what he needed them to do. But actually, sometimes what we need to do is when we see things that are needing to be done, we need to actually, say it, but also get up and be the ones who set the example so as to get things moving. And I'm going to leave it there. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.